All right, we're live. Welcome to another episode of Flip Your Switch with Grace. So I would introduce our speaker. My name, by the way, is Grace Burcal. I'm a physical therapist studying functional medicine and also autism specialist. This program, the Flip Switch with Grace, is we started this, I think, about less than a month ago with the purpose of just, advocating wellness. And I met our speaker somewhere in Facebook. She's very passionate. Um, she was actually introduced by my sister in the Philippines doing the low carb diet. And I just watch her. She's very passionate, um, still young doctor, very young. And I just, comment, and I didn't know that she was live. And she was like, all right, she replied, hey Grace. I'm like, ooh. And I keep on commenting, and I said, I want to connect with this doctor. She's very passionate. And we share the same advocacy. And before I heard about, intermittent diet. I know it's good, but I really didn't practice it that much because here in America we have a lot of food and I've gained a lot of weight. I'm actually looking something for, just to lose weight or something that's new because I've done everything, pretty much all the diet. So I got excited after I interviewed Doctora. Right after I did the first interview, I practiced what she preached, and I've lost a lot of pounds. And I was like, wow. So I invited her again. Let me introduce her. Dr. Grace is a physician specializing in ENT and a head and neck surgery. She was able to present and won various awards in research in many international medical fora. After Other than her specialty, she is a believer and an advocate of natural health and wellness. That's why we connected. Uh, that comes from within. He is an environmentalist, artist, and a dog lover. So without further ado, let me introduce our speaker, Dr. Josephine Grace Rojo. Thank you again for this wonderful
Hello.
one.
Hello. Finally, we are back. So it's our second time doing this health talk, and I'm so happy that you get to invite me and we get to share this live with our Facebook viewers and also our current members of Life Without Rice and also low carb feasting and fasting community, and of course other group, our flip the switch with Grace, and we are both Grace. So in our language, it is called Tokaya. So you're my Tokaya because we have the same name. So thank you so much. Since we are already running late, so we will discuss our topic for today. So that is type 3 diabetes and how sugar eat our brain. So we already have a lot of Facebook users currently who have been waiting for this talk because a lot of them it's really the first time for them to hear type 3 diabetes. So before we do that, thank you so much. There's a lot already who are commenting. Yes, this is live. So I cannot see your name, but I know that we can see you, and I'm so happy to be a part of this. So we have to identify a lot of terms. So diabetes, the term itself is actually related to urination because when you are diabetic, the one of the most common symptom is increase in urination. Okay, and that has a lot to do with the sugar in our system and our kidneys capacity to filter it is already exceeding, so we have to try to eliminate, our body is trying to eliminate that sugar through the process of urination. But diabetes, when there's other types, like for example diabetes insipidus, or that is a brain problem that results into over urination even if there's no problem with sugar. But in here we have to identify diabetes mellitus. So we have diabetes mellitus, or simply DM. Okay, so there's three types. Okay, diabetes mellitus. Okay, so this is diabetes mellitus. Okay, and we have, where is it? We have type 1. Type 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so for the purpose of this discussion, we will identify what is type 1. So type 1 is what we considered as young onset, although the term now is not really already that acceptable, because even type 1 diabetes is won't just happen in the young, or it's not just simply a congenital or an inborn problem. Simply put, type 1 diabetes is a damage or the incapacity of your body to produce insulin. So there's no insulin. So as a result, since there's no insulin for your type 1 diabetics, you have to be dependent on exogenous kind of exogenous type of insulin injections, that is artificial injections. And when you do that, you can see that people who have type 1 diabetics are prone to episodes of hypoglycemia because they have to inject multiple amounts of insulin. So there are different types of insulin. We will get into that later. And also, we have type 2. So type 2 is also known as adult onset. So adult onset. So the big difference between type 1 and type 2 is that the insulin here is actually present. Okay, there is insulin in type 2 diabetes. It's just that the insulin here is no longer functioning normally. So in type 2 diabetes, there is what we call IR, or insulin resistance. So insulin resistance it is when the insulin is no longer doing its job. That is primarily to lower the glucose in our bloodstream. Now, once there is already insulin resistance, so there is elevated insulin and also there is elevated sugar. So what happens? So what happens when there's elevated sugar and elevated insulin? So your body will actually go into starvation mode, wherein there is so much sugar in your body, there is so much insulin in your body, but the cells are still starving because it is no longer effective. Now, we might think that adding more insulin. So the usual management now is like adding more insulin injections to saturate, to further push the cells into really eating those sugar. But what the problem there is the resistance. You're actually not helping with insulin resistance. So before we will be able to really appreciate the importance and understanding of what is diabetes type 3, we have to understand insulin resistance. Okay, so insulin is not just about, it is more commonly known for glucose lowering. Okay, so it is known to lower glucose, it is known to lower glucose, but what we didn't know, it actually has other effect. So sometimes the insulin, the moment there's already resistance, it can no longer it can no longer lower the glucose. But the other effects of insulin is still being affected. So what are these effects? So it can lead to mitochondrial damage. So mitochondrial damage. So we understand that our mitochondria is actually the powerhouses of our cells. With a dysfunctional mitochondria, we cannot generate proper cells. So there could be a lot of oxidative damage. There's a lot of inflammation, and also there's a lot of protein synthesis. So what is protein synthesis? So it's not just creation of proteins, but it is really tumor formation or any protein misfoldings, because supposedly insulin is considered as an anabolic hormone. It's like a hormone, it's like a growth hormone. So it's an anabolic or growth hormone, okay? So normally, insulin is elevated in the young, okay? But when you are already an adult, like most of us here, if not all of us here, we no longer need so much insulin because all of our organs are complete, all of our organs are mature, and we only need very, very little, or what we call as baseline level of insulin, to continue to function normally, like for example the regular growth of our hairs, the regular turnover of our red blood cells and our other blood cells, the growing of our nails and the peeling of our skin. So those will just need very, very little insulin. So what will happen if there's insulin that will spike or chronically elevated? So it will actually signal more protein synthesis, more inflammation, more oxidative damage. And what is one organ that is mostly affected and mostly damaged by this up regulation, a vicious cycle of insulin? It's actually our brain. Okay? Why? Because our brain loves glucose. Okay? Our brain loves glucose. So whenever there is already insulin resistance, our brain cannot get the glucose that it needs. So what it does is it makes you want to crave more glucose. So as a result, you will eat more glucose, so the resistance will be upregulated. It will worsen these damages. Okay? So, what will come out of that damage? So, that is where we get the type 3 diabetes. So, we are saying, and we are now, it is a new term. It is not yet widely accepted by the medical field. I think there's only a very few research related to it, but they are simply making the term type 3 diabetes because they have found that type 3 that those who are diabetics and those who have insulin resistance and those with chronic uncontrolled sugar already having early onset dementia, early onset Alzheimer's disease, anxiety disorders, depression, and all other neurologic manifestations that can occur when there is already too much damage in the brain. So, since we already established that IR or insulin can cause mitochondrial damage. Mitochondrial damage, there's also inflammation, there's protein synthesis, okay, synthesis, and also there are, what was the other one again? So these plus the decrease in brain derived not BNF, brain derived natriotrophic factor is also decreased. So these manifestations are the ones that we see under Alzheimer's, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and many other neurodegenerative diseases, even what we call as psychiatric disorders like ADHD, others that would lead to anxiety and depression. So there are damage into one or all of these factors. So what do we do to reverse this? Okay. So in order for us to reverse this, we have to address the root cause, which is actually the elevated insulin and coming from elevated blood sugar. So what we need to reverse is the insulin resistance. Okay. Reversal of insulin resistance can aid and can possibly help in repair of these damages. And these protein synthesis is manifested in these, especially in these two major, what we call as geriatric problems, or what we usually find in old people. So elderlies, they already have dementia and they already have Alzheimer's. And when they already made an analysis or a post-mortem analysis in their brain, what they saw was protein aggregates. So in Alzheimer's, you have amyloid deposits, okay? Amyloid. And in Parkinson's, you have Lewy bodies. So there are so many medicines that are trying to address this. Okay, they try to how to remove the amyloids, how to remove the Lewy bodies, how to reverse the mitochondrial damage, the oxidative damage, and the inflammation, all of these. And it is said that if you take each drug, if you take one drug for each specific damage that was found in Alzheimer's, you will need to take more than 100 tablets of different specific drugs. And of course, we know that the damage, the side effects, and the overall effect of that 100 tablets plus is really not that sustainable. So the damage, it just goes to say that the damage that is found in Alzheimer's, in Parkinson's, is really that widespread. That there is no single drug, no single medicine that can really like just flip it in an instant, like magic. But it is now seen that there could be a way to fix this. So since we have been having all of these problems because we are only referring our brain as a sugar obligate organ, meaning it is just purely dependent on glucose. Now we understand that our brain actually can also feed with an alternative source of energy. So glucose is not the only source of energy that our brain loves, okay? But it is our brain's favorite, okay? It's just used to it, but it doesn't mean it is the best, okay? No. Research show that our brain can actually function better when it is being fueled under ketones. So ketones is not a first favorite, but once the brain is already fully adapted to ketones or the energy coming from fats, ketones can actually become your brain's true love. Okay? And this can now be its preferred illness, its preferred energy. And what will happen if it will fuel on ketones? The moment that it will fuel in ketones, it will no longer the side effects of glucose will be reversed. So since only glucose spikes insulin, with ketones, insulin will be kept low, inflammation will be kept low. So insulin, inflammation, mitochondrial and oxidative damage is also low. Why? Because mitochondria will both process glucose and ketones. However, with glucose, there will be a lot of residual garbages. You can think of glucose as coal. So there will be a lot of carbonated byproducts right after. And you can think of ketones as gasoline. So it's cleaner and more efficient. Okay? So with mitochondria fueling on ketones, there will actually be less of that damage and oxidative stress on on the cells itself, that they can actually function well. And what is more beneficial when it comes to insulin lowering, when your body is fueling on ketones, it will increase a brain protective hormone, which is BNF. With elevated BNF, which is known to be suppressed in patients who are having neurological problems, okay? But with elevated BNF, memory will improve. It will aid formation of new memories. It will protect old memories. So increased BNF is very, very much needed for brain health. So it's like equivalent to brain health, okay? So the question now is, how do we make the shift from our brain being dependent on glucose and now being dependent on ketones? Okay? So we can do that through two methods. Okay? Anybody can guess? You can put in your answer in the comment section. Hello, my dearest Flo. I think I can only see the names of the people that I'm friends with in Facebook. I'm not so sure. But anyway, we can proceed with how to get our brain into loving ketones instead of glucose. So we can do a slowly but surely technique, but there's also a jumpstart technique. So it's just up to you. Okay. So there's two way so that our brain will love ketones. So number one is no glucose consumption. So limit consumption of this. Why? Because as long as there is glucose, as long as there is coal, your brain, your body will prioritize this as a primary source. Okay? And the moment that it is prioritized, the moment that it is the only one, the moment that it is there, even if there is fats that can be converted into ketones, the release of insulin will actually drive the inhibition, okay, or the blockade of ketone usage. Okay, so we have to limit glucose so that we will facilitate, limit glucose to facilitate fat breakdown, fats as our priority fuel. Okay, so that's one way, and we will discuss that further. And the second way is actually, it might sound as shocking for some who are not yet used to me and who are not yet adept or part of our other groups, Life Without Rice and Low Carb Feasting and Fasting Community. The quickest way actually is to just not eat. And how come not eating can lead to ketone production or ketone formation? Because the moment you no longer eat, your body will consume whatever glucose is left in your system. And after that, it will now start to eat up your fat in your own body. So the two-way would be, you get your ketones either from your own fats, from your own body, or when you limit glucose, you can get more fats from your food. And it will also be that if you limit your glucose intake, and if you say, for example, you're afraid to eat fats and you are not eating a lot of fats, so of course your body will still go for your own fat. This is a normal process, and this is a natural process. And we believe that this is actually more natural than just keep on taking medicines, because not eating is already fasting. Okay? So, fasting, why is fasting natural? Because we believe that even if we are modern day humans, our body, our genetics, still is similar to that of a caveman or the hunter gatherers. And what is a typical day for a caveman or a hunter and gatherer? So, if this is daytime, so this is 12 noon, 6 in the morning, 9 a.m., and then 3 p.m. Usually, when they wake up in the morning, they will wait for sunrise. Okay? So, sunrise there, we have sunrise there, and there's no food yet. Okay? There's no food available before because they don't have refrigerators that we do. They don't have cereals that we do. They don't have instant noodles, Pop Tarts, what have you. So, as hunter gatherers, they will walk for miles. As foragers, they will keep on looking for whatever food they can find. As hunters, they will look for whatever live animals they can possibly hunt. Do you think that in a good day, even on a very good weather, they can find and they can easily look for food that easily to feed the whole tribe? Of course not. So usually it will take so much before they can find food. And if in a good day, considering that they are very, very lucky, maybe they can find food around 12 noon. And you think they can easily eat that? Of course not. They have to make fire, they still have crude weapons, so they won't be able to properly butcher their catch. So it will be a little while. So maybe we can presume around 1 or 2 p.m. they can already eat. And after that one, they will feast on it and enjoy and also be belly happy. Okay? So they're already very happy. Okay? And do you think they will still look for food for dinner? Of course not, because sundown is already considered as dangerous. Nighttime. Nighttime is already considered as a dangerous time. Okay? So if it's already a dangerous time, they will look for shelter. They will seek shelter. And they will go. And they will no longer eat food. So we can really presume that around 6 p.m. or around sundown, they will already rest. And their day will continue to be like that each day, each and every day. And what they've been eating here is actually devoid mostly of the common sources of carbohydrates that are making so many diabetics nowadays. So there's no sugar yet that time. You can argue that there could be fruits, but remember, fruits are just seasonal. It could just be harvest season for one kind of fruit, or maybe for that time. During that time, once a year. So the remaining times of the year, you can presume that there's no sugar, there's no fructose, there's no fruits. You can argue that there's honey, but how often do you think can they find honey in the wild? Okay? So generally, what they will have is maybe, mostly on a successful hunting day, are all meat. Or if they live near, the example, near the sea, so they can have fish or seafood. Okay? And if the hunt was not successful, maybe they can eat a little of root crops. But agriculture, planting, domestication was not yet part of our 2 to 14 million years of evolution, okay? It's not yet part. So we are nomads. We don't stay in one place for a long time. So seldom we can have a regular root crop that we can harvest anytime, okay? So maybe a little nuts and seeds is okay, but the quantity will be also very, very scarce. So on a typical day, they will be mostly stop eating around 6 in the evening, and they will no longer have to eat overnight until the next day. Okay? So that actually will already result into a daily minimum of about 18 hours of fasting. If they can eat around midday, like 12 noon, so 18 hours of fasting. Okay? And that 18 hours of regular fasting is actually also somewhat of the same time of the half life of our insulin. Okay? So insulin increases whenever we eat food. It's just that the type of food will have different effect on insulin. So the highest effect would be sugar or carbohydrates. Okay? So whenever we say carbohydrates, we don't refer to fiber. We don't refer to the indigestible parts of the carbohydrate, but the net carbohydrates, or what we call net carbs, or the ones that are equivalent to sugar or glucose in our bloodstream. Okay? The other kind of macronutrient that can have insulin effect would be proteins, okay? But it's not as much as carbohydrate. Most of the protein effect is made after there is too much protein of intake, that some of these proteins or amino acids are already converted into glucose, okay? And the last macronutrients are actually fats. So it can be animal fat or vegetable fats. So the effect of that is very, very low. So with this, you can see that even if you eat carbohydrates or proteins, and even if you spike your insulin, say for example, on that previous day, they already ate like a root crop, say for example, potato, okay, or some tubers. So it increased their insulin, but they won't be able to be eating that the whole time. So it might take around a fasting of daily 18 hours, and the insulin effect will just be negated. Okay, they will start from zero. Okay, and thus before there will be no insulin resistance. Okay, because insulin, the moment it rises again, it will still have the necessary effect, it will still be effective. So there's no surge of insulin that's in your system. So if you eat, like for example, if you eat around 12 noon, 12 noon. So your insulin will rise there. And for 18 hours, if you don't eat after 12 noon, by the time you reach 6 a.m., by the time you reach 6 a.m., your insulin will be now low. Okay? However, if you ate at 12 noon, okay, so this is insulin here and time. So example, you eat at 12 noon, and by 6 p.m., your insulin is already starting to get low. But you ate again. So instead of that 18 hours ending at 6 p.m., it will now increase again, go back, and it will have another cycle. And it will only start to increase now from 6 p.m., it will now become 12 noon. Okay? So that is the concept of why we promote actually intermittent fasting. Okay? And what happens in our modern day eating that makes us insulin resistant? So, on your usual day, like say for example, before you discovered low carb, before you discovered fasting. So, if this is your insulin chart in a day, insulin. So, usually Filipinos would eat at 7 a.m. So, that's already a spike of insulin. Okay? And around 10 a.m., there will be morning snacks. So even if there's so supposedly little, it's another spike again. Okay? And comes 12 noon, 4 p.m., and around 7 in the evening. So your insulin is at all-time high. So you're only lowering that during this 12 p.m. overnight, but comes morning, it will spike again. So you never actually reach baseline insulin level. And that's why there is insulin resistance, because insulin functions in a negative feedback mechanism. So what is negative feedback mechanism? Negative feedback. So our body has a lot of functions to maintain homeostasis, okay? And most of that function of homeostasis functions in negative feedback. There's only very, very limited parts of our body that goes on positive feedback. Say, for example, in ovulation. So this is a segue. So, for example, for women who are ovulating, so they create a cell. Okay, so they create a cell, and then that cell would release hormones, and the hormone that it will release will help this cell to grow even more. Okay, and its growth will produce more hormones until it becomes more, and it becomes big until a baby is born. Okay, so that is a positive feedback mechanism, and seldom that happens in our body. Okay, but what happens usually in many parts of our body is negative feedback. So for example, starter, so we begin with a single initiator. So this cell, for example, will produce another item. This is the product, and there will be a something like a quality controller. So there is a quality controller here to check that if this one is present, so it can check. So a product is produced. So it will now signal this producing cell, this factory, okay, to already decrease production because there's already a product, okay? There's already an output, okay? So if we put this in our body, so this one, whenever you eat sugar, so whenever you have sugar, okay, we have, okay, so whenever we eat sugar, so it signals our body to produce insulin, okay? So our body will now have, will this insulin will act on a cell so that this cell will take in insulin, will take in sugar, okay? So that sugar can enter, okay? And then once the cell recognizes that there's already sugar, that there's already enough sugar, it will actually make the receptor here for insulin, it will lower down the production of this receptor of insulin. The sugar will be inside the cell, and once it is already inside the cell, a DNA changes. There is DNA mediated changes that will decrease the production of this receptor so that even if there will be more insulin, this cell will no longer allow this insulin to act because it knows that it already has sugar. Okay? Simply because too much insulin will have so much effect that it can damage the cell itself. So this is actually a protective mechanism of the cell to protect itself. Because what will happen if there's too much insulin in the cell? So the mitochondria or the energy powerhouse house of our cells will get damaged. Okay? And also, there will be a lot of protein misfoldings or a lot of protein buildup, a lot of garbage that will be produced because insulin is a growth factor, it's a growth hormone, and it will keep on building up even if it's no longer necessary because that is what it is made to do. Okay? So, in order for the cell to protect itself, it blocks the receptors of insulin. So, what happens if you continue to eat sugar? So, the cell will protect itself, the normal cell will protect itself, the insulin will spike, and your blood, in the blood, sugar will increase, insulin will increase, but the cell, since it is already what we call resistant to insulin, so there's already IR, it will now no longer accept, no longer accept the insulin and the sugar. So even if it's already starving, because that's what happens when there's already insulin resistance. Even if it's already starving, but there's already no receptors made to allow insulin, it will starve almost to death. So it will activate our brain to keep on eating because it doesn't realize that there's actually too much sugar in the blood, but just cannot enter the cell. So you are actually in the vicious cycle of eating sugar, of eating insulin release, but blockade of insulin to the cells, and this blockade will produce more eating habits. So that is a vicious cycle. And when that happens, there's already a damage that can result into what we call metabolic syndrome, which is a byproduct biochemically of those factors that we discussed a while ago. So that was because of inflammation, because of mitochondrial damage, because of oxidative stress, and in our brain. Also, the production of protein buildup. So those are misfolded proteins. protein buildup and protein synthesis, but reduced healthy brain hormones, which would include BNF. BNF, by the way, since it's a hormone, it's mostly composed of fatty acids or a lipid like hormone. Okay? So, how do we reverse it? Why is it happening? So, what we just need to do is to break the chain. You stop eating sugar, you stop eating sugar. The moment you stop eating sugar, your insulin will go down, your insulin, and then slowly your body will become insulin sensitive again. But it will never reach this point as long as you keep on eating sugar. So, how will you survive while you are transitioning to this? So, you can actually benefit from taking fats, okay? Fats as energy and fats to be converted into ketones before it can be converted into energy. So there is this case study of an elderly man who is the partner of, I think he was the husband of a scientist as well. She is actually the one who coined the term type 3 diabetes. So that scientist was actually working on diabetic cure. Okay, so no, working on Alzheimer's cure, and his husband. How cliche and ironic it is that his husband was actually suffering from Alzheimer's. So for the longest time, the husband can no longer talk. All of he was spastic. So most of the time he is just sitting, not recognizing anything, just alive but not living. And this one doctor, one scientist, noted that there are, I think there was an herbal medicine that tried, there was this promising drug that says to cure that Alzheimer's. And I think it was Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. And then when she checked it in the lab, she noted that it's mostly composed of fats and it's mostly composed of oil. And later on, she realized that those are what we considered as now known to be MCTs or medium chain triglycerides. So, MCT oil. Why is it MCT oil it's mentioned right now? Because MCT oil is actually a part of coconut oil. So, a coconut oil is not made of MCT oil, although it is made of MCT oil, but MCT oils will have different levels of oxidation or different levels of processing in terms of how fast it can be converted into ketones. So MCT oil, the ones available in the market, are the ones that are readily converted into ketones. And when they use this, the brain started to function again. Although it takes time, it might take a while. It's not an instant, it's not instantaneous like overnight. But with fat adaptation, with the brain slowly forgetting glucose, it slowly forget glucose, and since it is starving, it starts to accept ketones as energy, and the repair was seen there. But before MCT oil was discovered, ketones actually is already produced naturally by our body. Okay? So what triggers ketones? It actually is from ketosis. And where do we find ketosis? It is not a common knowledge for a lot of medical practitioners. I am a doctor, but I've only appreciated this only just about 2 years ago. But prior to that, ketosis was always associated with starvation. So the term starvation is so negative that whenever you see ketosis with starvation, you tend to forget this because it's not good. Okay? But if ketosis is appreciated with deliberate fasting. So fasting and starvation is different. Yes, they are both deprived of food, but fasting is conscious. Fasting is deliberate. Fasting is something you can stop anytime you want. Starvation is psychologically devastating because you wouldn't know when will the next meal will be, or the control of it. Okay? So starvation can be so long that even if you want to eat, you cannot eat because you don't have any access to food. But when it comes to fasting, you are in control and you know exactly when you are already slowing down, transitioning to ketosis. And when you have ketosis, that is coming from fats, from your own fats, it can now convert it into ketones. And ketones is a more efficient fuel for for our brain because it will not have residues. Again, we would like to emphasize that glucose is like coal, okay? So it's like burning wood or burning coal. There's a lot of smoke, there's a lot of carbon footprints, there's a lot of charcoal left. But with ketones or gasoline, there will be no residues. If there is, it's very, very minimal. Okay? So this is why we would like to be fueling on ketones. And for others who will say that our brain is glucose obligate, that is actually not 100% true. Because research, although between glucose and ketones, our brain would love glucose because it's an easy fix. But it doesn't know that it's damaging it. But our brain, once it is fueling ketones, it can function better in ketones. And in studies dedicated for fasting, they have found that our brain can actually function on up to 70% energy coming from ketones and only 30% coming from glucose. So that's already a very big number. So if this is what is the number that they said, of course, this is just around a rough estimate. So does it mean that we need to eat glucose in order to provide that glucose need for our brain? So others who are anti low carb and those who are against saying no to low carb will actually capitalize on this idea that at some point we need glucose. And I agree, we need glucose. It's just that there is no essential glucose. Why is there no essential glucose? Most of the members of Life Without Rice and LCFF, the low carb feasting and fasting community, already knows this. Because our liver can actually produce its own glucose, okay, from the process of gluconeogenesis. Gluconeogenesis. Whenever you're fasting, after about 24 to 48 hours of fasting, your glucose is already at all-time low. So during this 24 to 48 hours of fasting, your liver will now start the gluconeogenesis. It will now start create its own glucose. But where will he look for those ingredients to create glucose? Okay? So do you remember the Lewy bodies? Lewy bodies and the amyloid deposits in our brain? That is from Alzheimer's. And this one is from Parkinson's. These are protein aggregates. These are misfolded proteins that get stuck in the brain of those with Parkinson's and those with Alzheimer's. That is considered to be one of the major causes of their dementia, of their neurodegenerative decline. These Lewy bodies, these deposits, will actually have a chance to be resorbed, okay, to be eaten, to be taken down, and be converted into glucose as ingredient for the gluconeogenesis. Okay? So with fasting, you're actually not just creating ketones, but you are also cleansing all this junk and also at the same time providing enough glucose for your brain. So isn't it amazing for our body to respond this way? So this is just how our body works. Okay? And with fasting, there is repair. But I understand that not everyone can do fasting. Okay? Not everyone can have the mental strength to do fasting that long. Good thing we are now so modern that our scientists even now found out how to live like as if our body is fasting, but we are still eating. So I think this is like a dream come true for many people. Your body experiencing fasting, you can benefit from ketone formation, from somewhat all of those clearing, but you are still eating. So I think this is the greatest news for others. And that is what is a fast mimicking diet is. So fast mimicking diet will give you a dietary composition of 0 to 5% carbohydrates of your caloric intake, more than 70% coming from fats, and the remaining would be our proteins. With this composition, you will actually try to mimic fasting. But this time, the fats will not be coming from your body, but will be coming from your foods. But it will still have the effect of producing ketones that is necessary for your brain function, and at the same time lowered insulin so that the resistance will reverse. So that is the two basic concept, because otherwise if we don't go into that, we are actually risking ourselves into our brain. So that's our brain. You think you are feeding it with sugar, but
No.
actually it is the sugar that feeds our brain, that feeds on our brain, and it eats our brain. So it will be up to us. Do we stay on sugar dependency
Mm-mm.
with all the junks, with all the oxidative stress, with all the mitochondrial damage? These are just technical terms. But this sugar, what will actually it will lose is your identity, is your memory, it is your family, it is your whole life story. And for me, that is just so sad because we can actually prevent this. We can all prevent this. And we don't even need to spend so much. Okay? A little supplements here and there, but you don't need to spend so much. And if you are still watching this, know that you can still prevent this, and it will just be up to you on how you will be able to control this. Because food intake can have many factors. It can be cultural, it can be familial, it can even be peer pressure, it can even be a demand from work. Say, for example, you're a cook or you're a food taster or whatnot. But the final decision for you to put that food in your mouth and swallow it will be yours. Okay? So that is why it is called type 3 diabetes, because it usually occurs not just with urination, not just with increased blood glucose, but it is because of the chronic increase of sugar in our system that can no longer be accommodated by our mature brain, and the building up, the growth factor, the tumor formation, the protein synthesis, the damage that it causes to our brain is already too much. So I think our time is almost up. So we have to leave it here. Thank you so much. But don't worry, if you wish to know more, yes, we will have a masterclass this coming April 10th. You are all welcome to join. But this is one part only. This is just a little and superficial part that I'd like to share with you to the easiest way I know so that you can easily grasp the concept. But of course, there are many, many fine details, but that is the gist of it. There is a book entitled Grain Brain that is somewhat extreme. I understand that it's just blaming all the grains, but I think between grains and table sugar is worse. Okay? That's why we don't put the grains in the danger list. It's just in our caution list, on our food list, because we can actually accommodate a little of that. But we put that in a caution list for those who are new to watching this. So it is in our caution list. The rice, the grains, the wheat, the bran, all those. It's because you can actually accommodate, but not when you already have an existing illness, not when you are already having insulin resistance. Okay? And there's still a controversial topic when it comes to grains that I just didn't touch. It's about the gluten allergy and the leaky gut. So it's a the idea behind that is that when you're the sensitivity of people from gluten is actually underestimated. So it is now presumed that a lot of people are actually really have celiac disease or gluten allergy but was just left undiagnosed because the symptoms are minimal, and those minimal symptoms can actually lead to those proteins coming from your gluten, and that can leak into your system. Instead of not getting out from your intestines, it will now go into our system, and those systems can be very highly inflammatory and are theorized to really damage the brain as well. So that is another topic. But with type 3 diabetes, we are more focused on the effect of overall sugar load in the body and overall insulin load that can lead to insulin resistance that is well established into cellular damage. And as for today, we are focusing on our brain health, and that's an overview of how sugar is actually eating our brains and not us eating sugar. Thank you.
That is wonderful, amazing, amazing information. I was like, wow, how can I squeeze it in my small brain? So I've been reading your book, Doctora. Here's okay, okay.
Thank you. Wow, it's really there.
In chapter 8 about fatty liver, I have a question. Just short, a quick question. When you have a fatty liver, would it mean that you're having diabetes next? Because I've read some that it could lead to diabetes. The fatty
So,
liver.
liver. So, fatty liver is simply too much too much fats in the liver. Okay? Too much fats in the liver. So what we can ask is, why is there too much fats in the first place? So the liver production of fats is driven by two major forces. Okay? So insulin can dictate the liver. So I would like to make this as a liver. So insulin will dictate the liver. Ay, pangit. So, the insulin will dictate, baka pagalitan ako ng teacher ko ng anatomy. So, okay. So, the insulin will dictate the liver to produce more fats, okay? If it is eating too much. So, the extra sugar, whenever there's sugar, there's an increase in insulin. And this insulin will dictate the liver to convert the sugar into fats, okay? However, there are incidents that there's no insulin and there's no sugar, but the liver can still create a lot of fats. Why is that? It's because of too much fructose. So fructose will not really spike insulin. But if you have fructose and if you have enough energy in your body, so this fructose will become excess. And this excess fructose has its own special pathway in the liver. So it can be directly converted into fructose 1 phosphate. And this fructose 1 phosphate is like a shortcut that it can now be converted into 5 forms. So it can be converted into glucose if you still need sugar. It can be converted into glycogen or storage form of sugar if you still have a space for glycogen. It can be converted into lactate, pyruvate if you're, say, for example, a sprinter. So you're a sprint runner. So you will be needing lactate and pyruvate to fuel your muscles, but this can lead to acidosis. So that's why a lot of them will have leg pain. And lastly, it can be converted into acetyl CoA. So acetyl CoA is a precursor for fat synthesis. And this fat synthesis is, the favorite would be triglycerides. So the triglycerides is made up of 3 acyl CoA, 3 acetyl CoA plus 1 glycerol. So this alone can elevate your your triglycerides. And these triglycerides will first be stored in your liver, okay? Again, in preparation for the expected fasting. So it will be stored there. But the moment it is already so much, so if it's already full, like you already have fatty liver, so it will now go into your bloodstream. Okay? It will go into your bloodstream and it will become elevated triglycerides in your bloodstream. And that alone, too much, it's a two-way. So you can see diabetes with too much cholesterol, with too much sugar and too much insulin can induce fat formation. However, too much fats in the system, too much fats can also lead to lowered adiponectin. Adiponectin can also lead to leptin resistance. So leptin sensitivity, decreased leptin sensitivity. So these ones, when these two are low, your appetite, your appetite will never be satisfied. So your appetite will increase because you'll never feel full. You'll never feel satisfied. So as you eat more, that's another pathway that can possibly give you diabetes, especially if you are not mindful with your food and what you choose are just glucose loaded foods. Okay?
All right. Thank you so much. That is a wonderful explanation. I've been trying to, connect the two.
Yeah.
So, because a lot of people that I know, that my patients here, they have a fatty liver, and next time you know it, they have diabetes. Okay, before
Yeah.
I close a question for you, I've seen like oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction. I just want to add to. Now, these are the things that I'm learning here in functional medicine, and with just, with when you have inflammation, oxidative stress, aside from, fasting, intermittent diet, ketosis, and all the things that Dr. said. We have the new science now. It's called nutrigenomics that is decreasing those oxidative stress and also helping your cells, your mitochondria, to what's this regrowth. And there's a new science now. It's called nutrigenomics, a study of the effect of nutrition to our genes. So I have that also in one of my talk. If you want to follow my group, I know this is a huge group. I'm just starting. You can find me in Facebook, Grace Steadfast. I did use my last name because for some reason I have a group, Flip with Switch with Grace.com, or you can find me in YouTube. This will be aired too in YouTube. Okay. For the last question, what is the past? I know we will discuss a lot of medical terminologies, but we want to know you more, Doctora. What is your past failure or mistakes that lead you to a great success now? What is your favorite past mistake that leads to a successful Dr. Grace Rojo?
I think it's not just on personal, but sometimes our loved ones can be our greatest motivators. So for those of you who know me, I came from a family of diabetics. So my dad actually, there are siblings of eight, and four of them died 1 year 4 years in a row. So 1 year apart. Only all of them age 60 years old and below, and all from diabetes and its complications. Not really diabetes, because as what they say, diabetes will not really kill you, but what will kill you is the damage that it will cause. So it's different from each of them. I think it was kidney failure for their eldest. It was cardiac attack for the second one. It was liver failure for both of my dad and my other uncle. And my dad included, aside from liver failure, was also a lung collapse. So that was it. And we thought, we just accepted all these times that we will go on the same faith. It's just that when I learned about it, especially with fasting, that's only when we realized that the standard knowledge in medicine, that diabetes is familial, is, yes, truly familial, but actually not really on genetics, not really on DNA, but it's mostly because of familial habits, familial lifestyle. So families eat together, loves the same food, and as others who are not agreeable with this, that's why I always say, why do we have husband and wives who are not related at all having both the same diabetes? And so it's so funny that both of them are having the same struggle, and sometimes I find it somewhat amusing that they some medicines they share, but some medicines they do not share, because their same doctor will give different medicine for both of similar conditions. But of course, individual differences will matter, because again, other another person will not react the same way with this medication. And it just goes to show how medications is really not sustainable. It can help us, it can adjunct us, like say for example, for those with type 1 diabetics, or those with who are already insulin dependent, they cannot go into fasting right then and there, because we have to make sure first that their sugar is normal or below normal. Otherwise, they are risking their lives because of diabetic ketoacidosis, or the presence of both elevated sugar and elevated ketones. And that can lead to a very acidic nature in our blood, and that can lead to coma and medical emergency. So, yes, we are not saying that medicines are already obsolete and we will not take them. We can't take them, but we can maximize them, but we don't need to depend on them. Okay, so it's more for me, since I was still in my late 20s when I discovered fasting. When I discovered, I think I just reached 30 then, when I discovered fasting. So it's more on of a scientific awakening. So I've always been fond of research. I've always been fond of science and how it can, and I'm also very frugal by nature. So if this kind of management is free, and what we just need is just the switch to change on the mindset, then why not? Then I started on it. I didn't talk about it much in during the first few months, because I tried it with myself first, together with my family, who was very supportive. And true enough, it works fine for me. And I'm so glad that over time, there's already a growing number of body of evidence, scientific evidence that supports this. And now we are doing our best to educate as many people as we could, as a part of our paying it forward. So this knowledge is so free, and not and it's something that you will withhold within you, because everybody can benefit from it, and the more people can benefit from it, the better it will be for everybody. So that's why I'm into this advocacy, to help share to whoever who might need to hear this as an option.
I think that's the reason why we click. We don't know each other, but our heart just click because we have the same advocacy. My advocacy is to educate people on autism. I have a son with autism, and I have read a lot. I've read a lot, and cried a lot. So this is my advocacy too. If you know somebody with autism, kids with autism, I have also a talk about it. So thank you so much, viewers. I'd like to thank especially LA Margaret from Australia. She's actually the one who helped me practice with the Zoom before I talked to Dr. Raha. So thank you so much. We have a lot of viewers. I know it's getting late, so thank you so much. And God bless you, Dr. Rojo. You're so amazing and so
Thank you so
smart.
much. The pleasure and honor is mine. Thank you. Have a
Thank
good
you.
night and have a good weekend there.
No, we
Bye
are
bye.
over. Bye bye.
Bye
Thank
bye.